We're going to be talking about immigration and the new Health and Human Services rules. And of course, as always, we're going to listen to what's happening in the mind of Jim Hochberg in the world according to Jim. So let's chat about that. According to the new Vogue acceptable woke catechism, forget everything you have ever been taught. Wake up, America. Only a handful of people in this world, in this used to be known superpower nation, have the knowledge to teach us the truth. I know that sounds harsh, but that's exactly how some of us feel about what we're being told by the media, some Hollywood elites, sports stars, and some government officials. Someone should start a website called Dial a Lecture so you will never fall behind on the new woke bylaws. I never thought facts could be considered wrong. Since we just celebrated Mother's Day, I have been pondering the newest woke effort. You know, the one where women are not called women when they give birth. It's actually the birthing people. Body parts created for the sole purpose of producing a baby are considered out of fashion and discriminatory. We remember well the headlines that says man gives birth to babies. That article should be put in a time capsule because I'm curious as to what the future birthing people are going to have to say about that if we're not overrun by robots. You know, I'm confused by all this, to tell you the truth. How can we as women celebrate everything that we have accomplished as women if women are not women? Maybe Hawaii better stop celebrating Boys and Girls Day, because someone out there is going to be offended. Did you know that some schools are now asking people to announce to the class how they identify so that the proper pronouns can be used during their tenure in school? But remember, gender is fluid. So according to the great sages of gender, you better get used to being called out wrong. Maybe we should just all be thing one and thing two. Oh, wait, we can't do that, right? Because Dr. Seuss has been canceled, right? Well, God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the fowl of the air and over the cattle and over all the earth and over every creeping thing on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created, male and female, he created them. And God blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply. And that's Genesis chapter 1, 26 through 28. You know, I guess I'd rather be shaped in the image of a God who understands and celebrates our uniqueness. Personally, I value the natural femininity and the strength of inherent masculinity, the complementarity of the sexes. It may not fit the narrative of the time, but it sure fits the narrative of God. And that's my thoughts for the week.
So the pronouns, very interesting. You know, the changing of pronouns from grammar to ungrammatical pronouns is sort of new in the scope of this culture war. And it's interesting because we tend by this time to be a little bit tired of arguing about things. And so we let the pronouns go. But actually, pronouns and grammar are part of our language and it's part of our culture. And so flipping around pronouns is actually an attack on our culture.
Well, I know that I've seen some interviewers on the mainland going and talking to people about this new Latinx thing, right? Yeah. Because all languages, anybody who's taken a language in high school knows that things have a masculine or a feminine.
Or neuter. Or plural.
Exactly.
Dative and accusative if you speak German.
Oh, good. I'm glad that you're doing this. You're kind of waking me up right away on the show. And half of the people right now are reaching for their dictionary going, what did Jim Hochberg just say? But I think that the point is that everything changes so much according to these gender sages. I'm calling them now. That's my new term. I haven't heard that anywhere else. So if you've heard it anywhere else, I apologize if I've taken that from
new.
Yeah, well, that's my thing. Gender
but the Babylon
sages.
Bee, one of my favorite websites, in response to the birthing people thing, said that men should be called lawn mowing people, which I thought was pretty funny.
Oh, gosh, the Babylon Bee. People should check that out if they really want satire.
Yes.
And please remember it's satire. I've had people send me things from the Babylon Bee and they're like, did you read this? And I'm like, that's a satire paper, right? So, but what I want to do is tie kind of this into, we just celebrated Mother's Day, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I know that people have been talking about this birthing people thing because it's just absolutely insane.
It's ridiculous.
It's crazy. But you and I last week got to enjoy the prayer breakfast that was celebrated right here in Hawaii. And I want to give a shout out to Matthew Kaneshiro, who runs the prayer breakfast. He's a personal friend of mine. We went to school together, small kid time. Matt has stories about me, but we will have him on the show one of these days. But anyway, I give a shout out to him. He did a good job. And of course, Kalo TV, as usual, helped do a lot of the production work. And I was able to take a few minutes and have a quick conversation with Pete Klaproth. And we're going to play that right now.
Oh, good.
So, hey, everybody, we're at the Hawaii Prayer Breakfast. It's going to start really soon. I've got Eva with me. So just so you know, I'm the producer of Faith in Politics. I get to push Eva around.
No, what you are the voice in my ear that causes me to do good and bad.
Yeah, and you know what? She is not a two-take wonder. One-take wonder, yes.
Yeah, that's because you always interrupt my train of thought.
Yes, because your hair's messed up or, you got to move closer to the mic.
Yeah, my shirt's falling off.
Right.
Yeah.
So before it's too late and you lose your seat, how exciting is this?
Oh, this is so exciting. They bring in some of the greatest speakers. And then, of course, after a morning of craziness, you get some word, you get all this great stuff, great fellowship, and then you go home and you're blessed.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me, Eva, how important is prayer to you?
Prayer is the most important thing. Start your day, get through the day, and end the day.
Yeah, that's really good. Very good, very good. Especially when you have to work with me.
Absolutely. And Matt Kaneshiro, who's an old personal friend. Hi, Matt.
That's great. So what are you expecting this morning?
I'm expecting to come out better than how I went in.
Oh, that's good. That's good. That's very good. Why can't you be that quick during Faith in Politics?
Because you just are always in my ear.
Excuses. Okay, so here's the biggest question I want to ask you. Pancakes or waffles, fried rice, Portuguese sausage, what's your favorite?
Bacon, extra crispy, bacon.
I love this woman. She's great. I love working with you, and it's so good. And if you haven't watched Faith in Politics, you got to watch it.
You got to watch Faith in Politics and watch Kalo TV. They got some great programming.
And especially today, because her mom tells her off today. It's so good.
I know. She did well, didn't she?
She did really good. It was really great. All right. God bless you. Enjoy your breakfast and the time.
So what I really loved about the prayer breakfast, first of all, is that some of what we're just talking about kind of really struck me. I got to sit by some great people at the table, and I give a shout out to all my table mates.
We had a great table. Thank you.
We did. Oh, thank you. Yes, you were one of my guests, you and your beautiful wife, Janet.
And your brother.
And my brother, James, and his wife, Janet. We had Walter Yoshimitsu was there. Suzanne Nakano sat to my right. And of course, one of my board members, Marion Logan, was there as well. But what's interesting is that what we do in Hawaii Family Forum is we really try to be neutral when it comes to the political realm of Republican and Democrat, because we're in Hawaii. We have constituents on both sides. Believe it or not, there are Christians that are Democrats. I know people find that hard to believe, but it really, really, really does happen. And one of the things I really enjoyed about the prayer breakfast was Dr. Tony Evans talked about being in a game. And he talked about being on the field where you have two teams.
It wasn't any game. It was a football game.
Okay.
For our listeners that like football, the viewers, football's different from baseball games. I mean, seriously, but go ahead.
No, it's great. But when you think about football, right, you have two teams and they are working to get to opposite ends of the field, right? They're
fighting towards opposite goals.
Opposite goals. And so when he talked about that, he really, I don't want to give it all away because I want people to take a moment visit the website where you can watch the entire prayer breakfast.
It was really good.
It was really good, and I think you'll really be blessed by the speakers.
And watch it all the way to the end.
And watch it all the way to the end. It's just, you don't want to miss any of the great speakers. But anyway, when they were talking about the field and Dr. Evans, the umpires, that's where it really hit home for me, because it was a matter of listening to the gospel foundational values that we should have going into politics at any time. And this show is called Faith in Politics.
Correct.
So everything we do politically is based on our faith. And we're not the only ones that do that. You have people of different faith values that also bring their faith into their public square and their decision making. But we as Christians, we make no bones about it, and we will never be ashamed of the fact that we stand on gospel values. That is what we do.
Correct.
And so he talked about how important it was that the book we should be paying attention to is the book, the Bible.
And he was referring to the officials' NFL rule book that they use. And he was saying, we're not wearing jerseys. We're like the officials in the striped shirts, but our book isn't the NFL book. It's the Bible. One
of the things he said that really struck me was that what has happened is too many of the umpires on the field are now wearing jerseys of one of the teams.
Right.
And I have to say that as somebody who's been involved in public policy here in Hawaii since 1994, I see the same thing happening. What happens is that people are not having real conversations anymore. And we've talked about this on the show. People are using talking points. They hear some great talking head say something that they think is good. They quote the president. I don't care if it's this president or the prior president. They just quote a great talking point, and it's repeated and repeated and repeated. We don't have a conversation anymore. Do you know what this show would be like if you and I just had, we just threw out great quips?
No.
Yes.
What would it be like?
It's not what we're for. I know it's not what we're against, Jim. It's what we're for.
The sky is blue.
Okay. Well, in any case, let's focus on why we do what we do. All of us, those listeners, those viewers, the Lord calls us to bring our faith into the public square. If it's not in the political arena, it's in our job.
That's right. And if you don't, then you're letting things happen that are in opposition to your faith statements. And if you let them happen, then you can't complain when they happen.
Well, and the other thing, too, is you're standing on foundational principles that never change. They're not shifting sands. So you're standing on a gospel value that was the same when Jesus walked the earth. It was the same when Moses walked the earth. It was the same when Adam walked the earth. Now, I know there are theologians out there saying, well, there are some inconsistencies in the Bible and all that. We're not going to talk about that. Well, we're going to talk about the one foundational truth, and that is that God loves us. We were chosen by God. We all have a plan and a purpose, and we are called to take our faith out into the world to make a difference.
And God redeemed us to himself through his work, not ours. That's really important.
Absolutely. We do what we do because of him, not because of us. And in fact, the Bible is very clear that there should be less of us and more of him.
And can I talk about the end of Tony Evans' sermon?
Yes, you may.
It was great. He's talking about a doctor that has a sign up saying he's got a doctor's office at his home. And some people need to have a doctor, and so they knock on his door, and he says, I retired a long time ago. And they really needed to get help by a doctor. And they said, well, either be a doctor or take the sign down. And Tony Evans translated that for me into Christians walk around with signs on saying, I'm a Christian. But if you retired from acting like a Christian, you either got to take the sign down or come out of retirement. And I really like that.
Yeah, you were saying that for the next hour after that. Take that sign down. Take that sign down. And of course, there is a comedian out there who talks as, here's your sign, right? So,
oh, that's true. I forgot about that.
Yeah, so you add those things together. It's actually pretty funny. What is your sign, Mr. Christian or Mrs. Christian? Or am I allowed to use pronouns like Mr. and Mrs.?
For me, I don't care.
Okay. Well, for those listeners that I've offended, I'm so sorry. Okay. So anyway, before we start transitioning into the next segment, we want to send our prayers and our thoughts out to the family of Colt Brennan. Colt was a hero here in Hawaii. A lot of us watching sports were really blessed by his time on the field, and we know that this is a very difficult time for you. And so we send our best
Amen.
aloha out to you. And Jim, as we move into the next segment, which will be the world according to Jim, you want to give us a very quick taste of where we're going?
Well, yeah, you own the government, and we're going to talk about that again.
All righty then. So you're listening to Faith in Politics on K-Light Radio, and you're watching us on Kahlo TV. We will be right back.
I have my beautiful wife with me, Sharon. Yeah, it's so good to be with everybody here. And of course, we have Pastor Tony Evans and Priscilla Shire with us. Did you see a star in the making when she was a little
She
kid?
was like this as a little girl.
Running around?
Yeah, running around. Yeah, she always was an actress kind of personality. She liked to get attention and give attention. And she was always putting on a show of some kind. Yeah, and then she would walk around. She'd take a brush.
Okay, this is
and walk around the house performing. There's a crisis need for men to man up, to be what we call kingdom men, and to rise up to the responsibility that God calls us to.
So, hey, I'm going to ask you right now. I wasn't planning on this. I'm sorry, producer Malala, but you got to come back and do a men's conference.
Hey,
that would be
all you
great.
got to do is invite me.
Okay.
That's all you got to do is invite me. I'm
We're
here.
done. We're doing it. Okay, that's the end, everybody. Oh, no, we'll keep going. Okay, sorry.
Welcome back to Faith in Politics. So we own the government. The government is of the people, by the people, for the people.
I've heard that before.
And that includes our rights under the Constitution. You own your First Amendment right, free speech, the right to assemble with people that you agree with, the right to exercise your religion, and the right to you own your First Amendment rights. You got to act like it. This show provides information. And the purpose of us providing information is so that you can be equipped with that information if you didn't know it before, because we hold what we say here to be actually truthful information, which is interesting in these days. But we want you to take the information, own it, and use it to keep your faith in the public square. And so I thought today I'd share an example of how to do that, because I stumbled across a letter that was written by a father whose name is Andrew Gutman to his daughter's very super expensive New York City school that she started kindergarten. She's been there for 7 years. He's pulling her out of the school because they've adopted this critical race theory in the family of the school community and all that kind of stuff. And so I want to read some pieces of a letter that he wrote to the school that he sent to all the families, telling them why he was taking his daughter out of school. And the reason I want to share these is to equip our viewers how they can take the truths and use them in a very serious but fair way to get their points across so that their faith can continue to be in the community. Because if their faith is not in the community is not going to include their faith. And I want the community to include my faith because I don't want to live in a place that doesn't include my faith. So anyway, the school is called the Brearley School, spelled Brearley. It's in New York City. You can find this letter online. That's where I found it. April 13th, 2021. He writes, "Dear fellow Brearley parents." By the way, this school costs $54,000 a year. It's a private all-girls school.
$54,000 a year, and you said his daughter's been going there for 7 years?
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
And so all of the parents were asked by the school to take a, quote, anti-racism pledge. Okay.
Do you have a copy of the pledge?
I don't.
Okay.
But here's what he says. Our family recently made the decision not to re-enroll our daughter for 21-22 school year. She's been there for 7 years since kindergarten. And this is what he says. "We no longer believe that Brearley's administration and board of trustees have any of our children's best interests at heart," which is the reason you would put your child in a school and the reason that you would take your child out of a school. So it's a very clear, fair, honest statement of purpose. He says, we no longer have confidence that our daughter will receive the quality of education necessary to further her development into a critically thinking, responsible, enlightened, and civic-minded adult. Wow. Remember when we went to school? That's what they were teaching. Critical thinking, responsibility, being enlightened, which means fair-minded and not prejudiced, and civic-minded, wanting to be involved in your community. So this $54,000 a year school, in this dad's opinion, is no longer doing that. So he's taken the daughter out. He urges the community at Brearley, the other parents, to act, and that's why I'm sharing this. We have to be action-oriented. He's urging them to act before the damage to the school community, and to all the children's education is irreparable. Okay? And that's what we need to be like. So he says, it cannot be stated strongly enough that Brearley's obsession with race must stop. And there is a big part of the United States population community that is obsessed with race. Whether it's appropriate or not, everybody would agree there's a lot of talk about race. He says the administration and board of trustees have displayed a cowardly, good word, and appalling lack of leadership by appeasing an anti-intellectual, illiberal mob and allowing the school to be captured by that mob. That's what's going on in the community across the country. And then he has some objections, which kind of reminded me of the Declaration of Independence. I object to the view that I should be judged by the color of my skin. I cannot tolerate a school that not only judges my daughter by the color of her skin, but encourages and instructs her to prejudge others by theirs. I object to the charge of systemic racism in this country. Systemic racism, properly understood, is segregated schools and separate lunch counters. It's the interning of Japanese and the exterminating of Jews. Systemic racism is unequivocally not a small number of isolated incidences over a period of decades. We have not had systemic racism against blacks in this country since the civil rights reforms of the 1960s, more than 50 years ago. To state otherwise is a flat-out misrepresentation of our country's history, and it adds no understanding to any of today's societal issues. He goes on, I object to a definition of systemic racism supported by this school, that any educational, professional, or societal outcome where blacks are underrepresented is prima facie evidence, which means it stands for itself, of the aforementioned systemic racism or of white supremacy and oppression. Facile and unsupported beliefs such as these are the polar opposite to the intellectual and scientific truth for which Brearley claims to stand. This is a really good letter because he's very articulate and he's right to the point, and I'm sharing it because our viewers can benefit from hearing this so that they can incorporate things.
Now, if somebody wanted to look that up, Jim, I know you've got more to read. Where could they find that?
So the URL is, we'll put it on.
You don't need to give them the whole thing. We'll make that available.
So he says he objects to the idea that blacks are unable to succeed in this country without aid from government or from whites. Brearley, by adopting critical race theory, is advocating the abhorrent viewpoint that blacks should forever be regarded as helpless victims and are incapable of success regardless of their skill, talent, or hard work. What Brearley is teaching our children is precisely the true, correct definition of racism. He objects to Brearley's vacuous, inappropriate, and fanatical use of words such as equity, diversity, and inclusiveness. If Brearley's administration was truly concerned about equity, it would be discussing the cessation of admission preferences for legacies, siblings, and those families with especially deep pockets. If the administration was genuinely serious about diversity, it would not insist on the indoctrination of its students and their families to a single mindset most reminiscent of the Chinese Cultural Revolution. Instead, the school would foster an environment of intellectual openness and freedom of thought. And if Brearley really cared about inclusiveness, the school would return to the concepts encapsulated in the motto, One Brearley, instead of teaching the extraordinarily divisive idea that there are only and always two groups, victims and oppressors. He objects to Brearley's advocacy for groups and movements such as Black Lives Matter, which is a Marxist, anti-family, heterophobic, anti-Asian, and anti-Semitic organization that doesn't speak for the majority of Black community in this country or represents their best interests. He goes on and on and on. He objects to gutting history, civics, and classical literature. He objects strongly to the sentiment Brearley has begun to teach what to think instead of how to think.
I think that what's going on in this nation right now is what's causing a lot of unrest. I mean, I know that Candace Owens recently did an interview where she talked about an interview that Michelle Obama did. And Michelle Obama was talking about what it's like to grow up Black in a nation that has systemic racism. And she talked about how she's worried about her daughters as they're learning to drive, that people are going to be looking at them different because of the color of their skin. Meghan Markle is another one out there who's been talking a lot about racism and the color of her skin. Now, both of these individuals have a lot of money. They have way more money than some of the white people I know in this nation. This nation does have a history of racism. It does.
It does.
And
this dad said it kind of ended 50 years ago.
No, so we don't want to whitewash anything. The Irish Americans that came in the early days have stories that are unbelievably cruel. We have Jewish Americans that have family members that lived or died in the Holocaust. I know there was a big thing several years ago about some of the schools weren't teaching the Holocaust properly. Right now, there is a crisis happening in Israel with all of the missiles and the bombs and the wars. And right now, our hearts goes out to everybody right now who's experiencing hate because of the color of their skin or their ethnic background or their religion.
Correct. But and let me just share with our viewers what the school said in response to this dad. Okay? Because it kind of ties into exactly what you just said. So the head of the school, her name is Jane Freed, called the dad's letter, quote, deeply offensive and harmful. And then there's a quote from her. Many have written to say they found the opinions expressed in the letter to be deeply offensive and harmful, and we agree. This afternoon, I and others who work closely with the upper school students met with more than 100 of them, many of whom told us they felt frightened and intimidated by the letter and the fact that it was sent directly to their homes. She went on, many of our students of color, especially those who identify as Black, felt the letter questioned their belonging in the Brearley community. Their belonging and their excellence are unquestionable. Now, the interesting thing is if they were reading his letter using critical thinking, I don't think they would have come up with those responses, because critical thinking would have had them examining what's going on in the school with what the dad was complaining about to take his daughter out. Anyway, Ms. Freed said that students at the school noted that as this letter, which denies the presence of systemic racism, crossed their doorways, the evidence of ongoing racism, systemic and otherwise, is daily present in our headlines. We're expected to all engage in this work in respect for one another. The letter failed both in content and delivery to meet that expectation. We are better than this, and we must do better for our students. They're counting on us. So the point that I wanted to raise in sharing this is when things are bombarding your faith position, and it's happening on this issue, a bunch of different issues, you can either shut it out because it's too much effort, which is what I think a lot of people do. But I would hope that instead we would take the position we want to exercise critical thinking and actually, like we used to do, have conversations about it. And the reason is, if we shut ourselves out, it's going to continue. And if it continues, we've allowed it. And I saw a sign that expressed that perfectly, and I hope we can show everybody.
You're watching us on Calo TV and you're listening on K-Light Radio. This is Faith and Politics. We'll be right back.
I have my beautiful wife with me, Sharon. Yeah, it's so good to be with everybody here. And of course, we have Pastor Tony Evans and Priscilla Shire with us. Did you see a star in the making when she was a little
She
kid?
was like this as a little girl.
Running around?
Yeah, running around. Yeah, she always was an actress kind of personality. She liked to get attention and give attention. And she was always putting on a show of some kind. Yeah, and then she would walk around. She'd take a brush.
Okay, this is
and walk around the house performing. There's a crisis need for men to man up, to be what we call kingdom men, and to rise up to the responsibility that God calls us to.
So hey, I'm gonna ask you right now, I wasn't planning on this, I'm sorry, producer Malala, but you gotta come back and do a men's conference.
Hey, look, all you gotta do is invite me.
Okay.
That's all you gotta do is invite me.
We're done, we're doing it. Okay, that's the end, everybody. Oh no, we'll keep going. Okay, sorry.
We have a mission here at Calo TV. We continue to be the only local, Christ-centered media outlet in Hawaii. God has planted this station to nourish believers and to harvest souls for eternity. It's a calling we hold dear, and today we need your help. Partner with us as we continue to create original local programs.
We're so very grateful for that whole journey.
Walking down to our story room.
Oh my gosh!
So it's where the state cannot tell the church how to run their services, what songs to sing.
Showcase solid biblical teaching.
We reach more people in one day with the broadcast of the gospel.
It's music to God's ears.
Improve our infrastructure and influence social media. In these dark and disruptive times, there's never been a greater need to be rooted in God's Word. The Calo plant has been a sustaining food in Hawaii for centuries, and Calo TV aims to bring much needed spiritual nutrition to these islands. Are you willing to labor with us for Hawaii, for your ohana, for the next generation? Go to calotv.com and partner with us today.
Welcome back to Faith in Politics. And now we're going to do Around the Nation in 7 days. We are going to talk about some of the craziness that's been happening across the nation. And Jim, I know that you actually enjoy this portion because you kind of feed off of the craziness in a sense that it's what keeps you busy. It's what butters your bread.
Okay.
All right. So the first thing that I want to...
I don't eat a lot of bread, you know. That kind of caught me off guard.
Okay. It caught you off guard. You're an attorney. You're supposed to be ready for this stuff. Okay. So the first thing I want to talk about is I want to talk about the Biden administration's American Families Plan.
Yes.
And now the Heritage Foundation did a report on the plan because most people are not going to read these reports or these plans that are hundreds of pages long and they have all of these different things in there. But I want to
and the reason people don't read them is because they come from political leaders. And these days, political leaders describe things in phrases that are patently false, but right to your face, they lie to you.
They do. And I like Heritage Foundation does a really good job. They're conservative. I'm going to throw that out there. But they do a good job of trying to put it in readable bite-sized pieces. And so this American Families Plan, it has some good things in it. But there's also some things in there that are problematic. And so I kind of want to focus on that. And so how we'll do this is we will look at some of the reporting that Heritage is giving us. Okay.
Well, and as a general background, there are, and has been actually for decades, this tug of war politically in our country between how much should parents be responsible for, in charge of, and allowed by government to raise their children, and how much should the government be doing it instead because they don't like what parents have the opportunity to teach their kids. That's kind of behind the scenes on this thing.
Well, yeah. And so on the surface, some of these things look really good. Like one of the things that this does is it provides massive funding for public education.
Correct.
Right. So that can be seen as a good thing. But if your focus is only on public education, then there are going to be people that have a problem with that.
Well, and if you remember, in Hawaii, we had several years ago the problem with needing preschools to be free. Remember?
Right.
And Unfortunately, the Constitution in the state of Hawaii, like the Constitution in a bunch of other states, has what's called a Blaine Amendment. And the Blaine Amendment prohibits the use of state tax money for private schools, sectarian schools. And since the preschools are all private because the DOE can't afford preschool, they wanted us to do an amendment to the state constitution, but it failed. But that's what this is trying to put federal tax money into for the same purpose they wanted to do it here before.
And I will say that locally here in Hawaii, I remember sitting in some meetings with government officials because we had a problem with locations for kids that were in kindergartens, right? And
Correct.
So the state was trying to be creative and find a way to get these kids into settings that would be beneficial for them. And some of them were private schools. And so they reached out to the private schools saying, you know, hey, can we maybe use property or whatever? And it got so insane to say, well, yeah, you could use the property, but anything that's religious would have to be removed from the wall. So if you're in a Catholic room, and there's a crucifix on the wall, you gotta get that crucifix off.
Or you can cover it.
Or cover it or whatever. Yeah. And so it was insane. It was absolutely insane. But just briefly, what that portion of the plan would do is it provides $200 billion in funding for free preschool for 3 and 4 year olds.
And remember, the reason that the government is interested in teaching children that young, because 3 and 4 is often mother's time to train kids, and they're potty trained now. So you're doing other kinds of behaving well with other kids. And there are cultural issues, moral issues being taught by moms. They want to take the kids away at that early age.
Well, as we talked in our Mother's Day special, moms, there's so much pull against mothers right now. Mm-hmm. They are so busy that mothers, in days of old where mothers used to be home, and I am not advocating that all mothers stay home, so I don't want to get any hate mail, but
if mothers could stay home, I would identify as a mother.
Oh, goodness gracious. That's a whole nother show, Mr. Hochberg. Okay, so anyway, the other thing that it would do, and I want to go through these really quick because our time is short, it would provide $109 billion for free 2-year community college for all Americans, including Dreamers. And then there's massive spending on more teachers. Okay, so we're not going to get into detail about this. Maybe we'll do a show later where we'll break it down a little bit more. The other thing that it does is it incentivizes the growth of childcare. And it basically makes a $225 billion investment into overhauling the childcare system into a federally run system that takes children out of the home and provides less flexibility for families to choose the best childcare.
And when you do anything on a federal level, you get one size fits all instead of local control. And it's not a good idea. Alabama is so different from Maine, so different from Hawaii, so different from Texas and Alaska.
Well, we say that ad nauseum, Jim.
Yeah.
Hawaii is so different than every state that it pains me every time I hear somebody say, well, why can't we be like, and then they'll bring up some state, because we are not. Hawaii, we are part of the union and we are proud to be, but what we have here in Hawaii is so special. I don't ever want to see what we have here morph into California. And, you know, I have friends and family in California sending love out their way as they maneuver their process of a new governor. The other thing that this does is it provides for a $15 minimum wage for some childcare staff. So, I mean, they're trying to build this $15.
And again, $15 in New York City is nothing. But $15 in, I don't know, someplace in the South, in Louisiana or somewhere, I don't know, it's a lot of money.
Well, and, you know, when you're looking at the minimum wage, and I know because I deal with this in my other role, there are some companies that are already providing more than $15 per hour in Hawaii. So, you know, it's like, I always say, I don't understand why there has to be a one size fits all. Why can't, the government has not been afraid to go after big money makers all the time. I mean, they're talking about that now when it comes to taxation, right?
Correct.
Let's go after the top earners. So the government is not scared of targeting certain groups. I don't understand why they can't say, if you're a big company, a multi-million-dollar company, you should be paying your employees this and more. But I have to
disagree because it depends. It's a local issue. Every locality, not DC, needs to make those decisions.
I'm agreeing with you. I'm not saying that it should be a number that everybody uses, but I'm saying that if they're going to go after, why don't they go after the big companies? Because the small mom and pops, they're doing the very best they can to provide a job to the community. And so,
well, and I will tell you right now, the small mom and pops can't find employees because of the unemployment situation.
Well, that's the craziness that's happening right now. There are people that are refusing, at least some of the reports are saying people are refusing to get a job because right now they're rolling in the money more so than if they go back to work. But there's people refuting that. So,
well, and people will say nobody's going to stay home for $2,500 a month. But if they were only going to make $2,700 a month if they went to work, they probably would stay home and have all their time free and lose $200 a month.
Well, I tell you what, everybody in this country, when you get to a certain age, you need to learn how to do a budget, right? In your household, you run a budget.
Yep.
You know what you bring in. You know what your spouse brings in. You know what your monthly expenditures are. You know when you overspend and what happens when you have to put something on a credit card or when you have to borrow. I don't understand why that same concept isn't used for our government, because right now everything looks good. Money, 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 money. We're going to give money. We're going to give money. We're going to give money. But somebody somewhere is going to have to pay for that.
Okay, so the question you ask is answered by something called balanced budget requirements. States have balanced budget requirements. The federal government, the Congress didn't pass a law making them have a balanced budget. That's why.
We should definitely dedicate a show to that, because if Americans are asked to balance your family budgets, then our government should do the same. But going back to this American Families Plan, one of the most concerning aspects of this is that it expands abortion. The American Families Plan, it makes Extended Affordable Care Act subsidies permanent. And in that case, it creates a public option. And this would allow non-Medicaid recipients to buy into healthcare plans that cover abortions, because obviously a lot of faith-based organizations will not cover abortion in their healthcare plans. Although
the Supreme Court already ruled in the Hobby Lobby case that faith-based organizations or for-profit organizations owned and run by people of faith cannot be forced to buy insurance that supports abortion.
Well,
but they don't care what the Supreme Court said. They're doing it anyway.
So here's the bottom line on this, right? Is this plan is going to cost money. No matter if you agree
everything
with this,
Congress does
right?
Cost
Everything
money.
They do costs money. And so this plan, once it's established and in place, it has to be funded. And so what Heritage did in their report is they're saying, so how will this be funded? And so they gave a couple of bullet points. First one is it will increase the tax rate for the highest earners from 37% to 39.6%, where it was before the 2017 tax cuts. They'll revise the capital gains and dividends tax. They will eliminate the tax loophole when wealth is passed down to an heir, except for family-owned businesses and farmers. They'll go after hedge fund partners and increase the Medicare tax for those with an income of over $400,000. And I'm sure they're going to get creative in a lot of different ways, but this is what Heritage has put out. So basically, Americans that do not support abortion are going to be paying for abortion. And this is the biggest thing. While groups like Planned Parenthood are making their claims that abortion is necessary to save the lives of the mother and all this kind of stuff, we heard this, did we not, during assisted suicide when that was being fought in Hawaii? Well, if you don't want to participate in assisted suicide, then you don't have to. But what they don't realize is that was the same thing we were told about abortion, except that now they're coming after they are. Here in Hawaii, we're already paying for abortions. And people in Hawaii do not know that. They don't know that when their taxes are taken, their state taxes, that part of this is going in to cover abortion. And I think that going back to the letter writer.
I was just thinking of it too. We need to write letters to the legislature and the governor saying, we don't want to pay for abortion with tax money. It's an easy letter. If everybody did that, they'd read them, I hope, and maybe wonder whether it's a good idea to follow what we're saying.
Well, and I think that's where organizations like Hawaii Family Forum and Hawaii Family Advocates, and there are other organizations out there doing the same type of work that we are, This is why it's good to plug into an organization that does this, because you see a bigger picture. You can have a rally and have hundreds of people show up, and that's good. People should raise their voice, but there has to be a strategy. What do you do with that energy? And is all of this going to make a difference? I think
We've
there is
had huge rallies before.
Thousands of people. I mean, we always go back to that red shirt rally that we put on, and that took a lot of work and a lot of time. And the counts was different, but there were thousands upon thousands of people that showed up, and the same people were voted into office. And same-sex marriage was easily passed by our legislature.
Correct.
So there is a time to raise your voice. There is a time to get active, but my people perish from a lack of vision. And I think that you have to get the right people in the room to start talking strategy. And as always, to do things the way we do in Hawaii with love and grace. You're listening to Faith in Politics on K-Light Radio, and you're watching on Kalo TV. We will be right back. And in that next segment, you're going to hear some of the comments from viewers just like you.
I have my beautiful wife with me, Sharon. Yeah, it's so good to be with everybody here. And of course, we have Pastor Tony Evans and Priscilla Shire with us. Did you see a star in the making when she was a little kid?
She was like this as a little girl.
Running around?
Yeah, running around. Yeah, she always was an actress kind of personality. She liked to get attention and give attention. And she was always putting on a show of some kind. Yeah, and then she would walk around. She'd take a brush.
Okay, this is
and walk around the house performing. There's a crisis need for men to man up, to be what we call kingdom men, and to rise up to the responsibility that God calls us to.
So, hey, I'm going to ask you right now. I wasn't planning on this. I'm sorry, producer Malala, but you got to come back and do a men's conference.
Hey, look, all you got to do is invite me.
Okay.
That's all you got to do is invite me.
We're done. We're doing it. Okay, that's the end, everybody. Oh, no, we'll keep going. Okay, sorry.
Welcome back to Faith in Politics. And we were talking about the Health and Human Services mandate. No, we were talking actually about the faith. We got to do this again. Welcome back to Faith in Politics. In the last segment, we were talking about the Families Act that they're working on right now. And now we want to just briefly talk about another couple of things. So you're on, Jim.
Yeah. So this week, President Biden's Health and Human Services Secretary, Javier Becerra, remember, he's a lawyer, not a doctor. He's running that department. They want to enforce a new ban on discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity in the area of the country that Health and Human Services regulates, which is hospitals, right? So doctors and hospitals and nurses and stuff are going to be subject to the same requirements in performing their services that the Supreme Court ruled in the Bostock case. You can't fire people based on sex, which is actually in the law in Title IX. And the Supreme Court said gender identity is sex. Well, the Health and Human Services law doesn't say sex discrimination. So they're adding it without congressional act, which is, again, rogue pirate conduct. But be that as it may, the bottom line is people in the medical industry are going to be subject to being sued for discriminating when they make decisions that are based on sexual orientation and gender identity, which basically has to do with gender reassignment, medication, surgery, psychological stuff. And there's a lack of agreement on what's proper in the medical community in those areas. So the Biden administration's just coming in like Marxist communists and changing the rules and making people subject to penalty based on their belief system. And it's wrong.
And some people are thinking that they're doing this to get around the discussion they're having on the Equality Act. It's a way for them to get in there without having any congressional
because Congress
oversight.
isn't passing it.
No, absolutely. Now, another thing that's happening, Jim, is that there's a bipartisan group of senators right now that they're forging ahead with talks on comprehensive immigration overhaul legislation, right? And Republicans right now are very, very reluctant to do that because they believe that there is a crisis at the border. And I know right now there's a big thing on, can we call it a crisis at the border? It just depends on who you're talking to.
I would ask the people that live there, and they seem to think it's a crisis.
Well, you can watch. I mean, a regular person, I don't care what news you're watching, when you see these children,
those 5 abandoned little kids,
children that are coming, I think I just want to share something with you. And this was from the AP this week. The Biden, and I'm quoting from an article that says, migrant children held in mass shelters with little oversight. Now, this is an AP story. The Biden administration is holding tens of thousands of asylum-seeking children in an opaque network of some 200 facilities that the Associated Press has learned spans 24 states and includes 5 shelters with more than 1,000 children packed inside. Confidential data obtained by the AP shows the number of migrant children in government custody more than doubled in the past 2 months. And this week, the federal government was housing around 21,000 kids, from toddlers to teens. And a facility at Fort Bliss, a U.S. Army post in El Paso, Texas, had more than 4,500 children as of Monday. Attorneys, advocates, and mental health experts say that while some shelters are safe and provide adequate care, others are endangering children's health and safety. I don't care where you are on the political spectrum. I don't care how you identify. This is a problem. We need to step up and we need to help these kids. I understand moms in other places wanting to provide a good place for their children to be raised. But this is a crisis, and we got to stop playing word games and just fix the problem. Stop pointing at prior administrations. Stop saying this happened before, this will happen again. Do your job. We elected you. We put you in office. Fix the problem. This is unacceptable.
And if only the people that have the power to do that would listen to you, it would be fixed. But they are actually listening to the political hats.
Well, and right here in Hawaii, Representative Ed Case did a survey.
He did.
And he sends it out to everybody.
I actually got it.
Yes. And so I'm very interested in the results, and it's a very quick survey. He basically asked just a few questions. And it's so funny. We did our survey and suddenly everybody's doing surveys. And I got to say, we were out there first. We were. And I also want to say, when it comes to our survey, our results was pretty close to the one that was done by Civil Beat.
Yeah.
So,
and the interesting thing is, your reason for writing your questions was just to find the answers. Ed Case, on the other hand, is looking for support for policy positions. And that's very different. So I looked at his questions with a skeptical eye, and I came up with some issues with his questions.
Okay, well, and that's what I was going to say is surveys, depending on who puts it out, everybody's going to attack it. Right? People attacked my survey saying it was unscientific. When I looked at his questions, I can see where he's going as a congressional leader. I picked up right away where he was going with his questions. But I think I just want to take just a few seconds to just bring out some of the highlights on this, because I really want to give some time to some of our listeners and viewers who wrote into us. So
maybe we can do this again later too.
Okay, so give us one great tidbit, and we will talk a little bit more in depth next week about this.
Okay, so the first question had to do with the immigration system, not legal versus illegal, just the whole package. And the question was, which one of the following statements reflects your views on the whole system? And almost 100% of the people said it needed reform. And only 3% said it was working fine. And when you look at the other questions, they are inconsistent with the response of 97% of the people thinking there's a problem with the overall system, because he doesn't ask specifically about enforcing the existing law.
Okay, so next week on show, we'll make sure that we actually dedicate a little bit more time to talking about the immigration system. Here in Hawaii, we also deal with immigration. We have a lot of different groups coming into Hawaii that you don't normally hear about on the mainland. So we want to do that. And maybe we'll have a special guest on that. So you want to stay tuned on what we're going to do. What I want to do right now is shift a little bit, because Jim and I have been inundated once again by many of you listeners and viewers viewers. At the prayer breakfast last week, I was approached by several of you, and I want to give a shout out to each and every one of you. And there were many of you that came up to me at the prayer breakfast and said, "Hey, Eva, we watched the show, love it." There were a lot of great compliments to Calo TV and K-Light Radio for doing it. And so we want to make sure that you're aware that we're starting to make a difference, and we're making a difference because you watch and you listen to us. So I just want to share a couple of these great emails that we got. The first one I want to do is I want to give a shout out to Deborah, who said, I watched your Mother's Day program, and it's very interesting to me as I wanted to know more about you. I don't know why people want to know about me. I got to look at myself every day in the mirror. It's not impressive.
Yeah, but you've been there the whole time.
That's too funny. And she said that the segment was very enlightening to her because she grew up the oldest of 7 with a single mom who was harsh and extremely controlling. Came home, she worked 2 jobs, came home usually angry, or if she wasn't, she could snap in a moment, and it was usually at me. But as a child, I had no idea the burden she carried. But hearing the stories told made me realize my situation was not unique, that this is a common thing, especially with my oldest child. I actually felt something leave me, and I experienced kind of relief. So I shared your segment. I know Sharon also received some feedback. I think she said it was from somebody in Australia who was really touched. And so I'm really grateful that we're even getting outside of the shores of Hawaii.
Well, and one thing that Deborah asked is whether I'm familiar with the For Your Right civil lawsuit. And I am. I think his name is Mark Victor or Victor Mark. I'm not sure, but he's the attorney that filed a COVID case at the same time I did in June of last year. And we actually cooperated together in our 2 cases. So I am familiar.
Yeah. So, and I'm going to move through the rest of these really quick. We got somebody from Sharon who says that the program with Jim is a blessing, and she asked for a pocket constitution. She said, ironically, in my opinion, those yelling hate crimes are the haters. They hate Jesus, freedom, Republicans, and a laundry list of other things. They also want to take our arms. We cannot defend ourselves. Only they and criminals will have weapons. And then, so I want to thank her. There was also a Jeff. Jeff was actually chatting with me, I believe, live. So thank you, Jeff, for watching on YouTube and chatting. And he wants to thank, because we're going to be blessing him with a mug and a pocket constitution. And he promises that he will wear them both out. But he wanted to, so he kind of went in a little bit more about himself. But he says, I am intrigued by the accent of Sharon Klaproth. And so she asked if she speaks South African, Kiwi, or what. She is Australian. And yes, we love her accent, and we appreciate that she took time to come out. And everybody made the connection with Pete, the guy behind the scenes. Yes, that is her husband. And so they are married.
And so Jeff asked for a PDF of the Pocket Constitution. There are PDFs of the Constitution all over the internet, not the Pocket version, but we're happy to send them.
Okay. We got somebody, Ray, we want to give a shout out to you. And she basically talked about Maisie's hate crime bill, and she feels that it's going to further divide us. We want to give a shout out to Leona, who also, she specifically talked about being a conservative and loving Jesus and living in a state where politics is so polarizing. We want to thank Rodney, who says he loves faith and politics and preaching on Calo TV. He wanted a Calo mug and a pocket constitution. We got Shelly, who was on the fence on the gun issue. And Shelly, you're not alone. There are a lot of people that want to do that. And also to Roxanne Jim, who is going to start supporting the show, which leads me to this. If you want this show to continue, you've got to partner with Calo TV to make that happen. Send a check. Unfortunately, everything costs money. There's a lot of work behind the scenes to make that happen. So reach out to Calo TV, reach out to K-Light Radio so they can continue their great broadcasting. And you want to stay plugged in with Faith and Politics, because we've got more things happening around this nation, and we want to be your voice in the community for faith, family, and freedom. You're listening to Faith and Politics on K-Light Radio and watching on Calo TV. We'll see you next week. Mahalo, everybody.
Aloha.